but we've all heard and are very familiar of the story of the birth of Jesus and the visit of the three wise men. We've all heard many times how Jesus was born in a stable amidst the oxen and the sheep. And of course, there was the donkey that Mary had ridden on all the way from Nazareth to Bethlehem. We've also heard how the band of angels appeared there over the stable, and how shepherds who'd been out in the field gathered around, and how three wise men, three kings from the east, came and joined in the worship of the infant baby Jesus there in the stable as they worshiped together this newborn babe. These three kings, also known as the three wise men, had come from the Orient on their camels, following a star which led them from the east all the way directly to the birth of Jesus. The three kings were named Melchior from Persia, Gaspar from India, and Balthazar, who was probably from Arab Africa. We even sing the Christmas song every year, don't we? We three kings of Orient are, and so forth and so forth and so forth. It's a great story. Problem? Hardly any of that is true. Certainly not in the Bible. Well, where in the world does it come from then? Well, we've been the victims once again of tradition, of fable, and fake news. Well, today, let's set the record straight. What can we say about the foreign visitors that the Bible speaks of who came to visit the child who was born King of the Jews? What does the Bible explicitly tell us about these visitors whom Matthew calls magi? Well, let's find out today. We're going to examine the second chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, which is the only place in the Scripture where this is spoken of. And we're going to explore that account and see not only what it says explicitly, but what it means for us who are Christians today. So let's go to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, and we're going to begin in verse 1. Chapter 2, verse 1. Reading from the NIV translators put it this way. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, magi from the east came to Jerusalem. All right, let's unpack it. There's a lot of information in there. The NIV puts it, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea. The Greek is, having been born in Bethlehem. But what's the point? After he was born, having been born, do you notice anything about that? He had already been born. The birth was past tense when this event happened. But it was during the time, the days literally, of King Herod. All right, during the days of King Herod. When were the days of King Herod? Depends on who you ask. Many thought he was the king from 36 to 1 BC. However, more modern scholarship has agreed on the dates 37 to 4 BC. So, whichever date you might choose, you have Jesus being born BC. Anything about that strike you as odd? Yeah, doesn't BC mean before Christ? Okay, so let me get this straight. Jesus was born before Christ. How do you figure that? We've got some problems going on already. Well, where did this notion of BC and AD come from that we still use today here, 2,000 years later? We're still using this kind of reckoning. Where did it come from? Well, it came from a 6th century Roman monk by the name of Dionysius Exiguus. That is, if you want to put that in modern English, Dennis the Little, or Dennis the Humble, however you might want to translate that word. So he created a calendar, and he hoped that it would be a good calendar for Christians, because there were a variety of calendars in use, but he wanted one that Christians could use. Now, he focused on the date of what he thought was Jesus' conception based on the date of Jesus' death. Now, as we've discussed previously, around 200 AD, the thought began to circulate that Jesus had been crucified and died on March 25th. That was a date that was picked, and it seemed logical to a lot of people. In fact, they said the world was created on March 25th. Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit on March 25th. The flood was on March. Everything was on March 25th. So the death of Jesus was on March 25th. Now, what Dionysius wanted to do was determine the date to celebrate Easter for Christians around the world. So March 25th was the traditional date. I'm not saying it's accurate. I'm saying that's the traditional date that was in the thinking of a lot of Christians at the time. And so he wanted to pinpoint it. What year would this have been? March 25th, okay, we kind of have that. But what year? Well, we've got the years of the Roman emperors. We've got this and that. He says, let's just start afresh. This was the year Jesus died. And we all know, quote unquote, from tradition that famous men always die on the day on which they were conceived. Okay. Therefore, since he died on March 25th, he must have been conceived on March 25th. So that's when Jesus died, but that's also when he came to be. So that year that Jesus came to be must have been the first year of the Lord. And we're going to make a calendar that counts from the year of the Lord. And he used it in Latin. And in Latin, it came out, AD was the abbreviation, the year of our Lord. So he figured out what year that was, called it 1 AD. Now you might say, why wasn't it 0? There is no 0. No year 0. So 1 AD, Jesus was conceived. Well, if Jesus was conceived on March 25th in 1 AD, when was Jesus born? Well, that wasn't really that important to Dionysius or anybody else at the time, but for the sake of argument, 9 months later would have been, December 25th, 1 AD. Or not 1 AD, but 1 AD. Jesus was born on 1 AD. Now, he must have died about 30 years later. Okay, so we got it. 1 AD is the year that Jesus was conceived and born. And then 30 years later, 30 AD has got to be the year he died. Okay, so we got that set. What do we call the time then before that? Before Christ. BC. Okay, so now we got, you say, well, that's all really kind of questionable. Yeah, we're still using it today. So it kind of stuck. So what happened? How did Jesus get born BC then? Okay, well, around the Middle Ages or so, archaeological evidence, particularly coinage, tended to point for some different dates from what Matthew and Luke have for the reigns of certain Roman rulers. So naturally, that must be authoritative. I mean, it's archaeological. Well, except for the fact that certain leaders like to make their reigns appear longer than they really were, but never mind about that. We're going to go with what the coin said. So according to the coinage and other archaeological information and some other stuff, we're going to figure that Jesus was born 4 BC. Sorry, Dionysius. were wrecking your scheme. Now, that's a lot to say this. Don't put your faith in dates. Dates are, generally speaking, questionable. And the longer ago they were, the more questionable they are. But anyway, what does Matthew explicitly say? Matthew explicitly says that Jesus was born during the time of King Herod. Okay, what else happened? During that time, after Jesus was born, before Herod was dead, which we're going to assume was 4 BC, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. What are Magi? Well, first of all, we notice that Magi is the plural of Magus. Now, what is a Magus? Well, not to be confused with the leader of the Ferengi, for those of you who are Star Trek fans, the Grand Magus. This is a different kind of Magus. This Magus is a magician. In fact, where do we get the word magic? Magi became magic, magician. But were they all magicians? Were they all sorcerers? Were they all wizards? Well, according to historical records, some of them would appear to be what we might call scientists, astronomers. Some were astronomers, and you might say also astrologers. So what were the Magi? Lots of different things. Priests, yeah. Scientists, yeah. Magicians, yeah. Sorcerers, yeah. Fakes, yeah. Real good folks, yeah. How many times have we said, don't ever paint a group of people with one brush? People are different, and so were the Magi. Now, how many Magi were there? What does Matthew say? Look for a number. Oh, wait, there is no number. So how many were there? There had to be at least 2. You know why? Magi's plural. So, okay, thank you, Matthew. You've nailed that down. There were at least 2. According to the Eastern Orthodox tradition, there were 12. According to the Western tradition, there were 3. 2, 3, 12. How many were there? No one knows, and Matthew didn't care. He's got Magi. Put any number you want in there. Now, everyone assumes they were Gentile. Is it impossible they were Jewish? I would say almost, but very few things are impossible. Were they Jewish? Were they of the 10 tribes of Israel or something like that? Probably no, because that doesn't fit the literary purpose that Matthew is going to introduce them for. Now you say, wait, okay, so Matthew's got these Magi. Where are they in Luke? Luke doesn't like Magi. Just read the book of Acts. Every time you find a Magus, there was one by the name of Simon, by the way, Acts chapter 8. Luke does not like Magi. For Luke, Magi are sorcerers, deceivers, wizards, and need to repent. So Luke does not include them in his infancy account. Matthew, writing to Jewish Christians, probably, does not include shepherds. Why? Jewish folk know shepherds. They know some shady shepherds. So I think I'll just leave the shepherds out and I'll bring in the Magi. So Matthew, for his Jewish audience, brings in Magi, scholars, wealthy, famous from the East. Ooh. Shepherds, not so much. Luke does not like Magi. he brings in the shepherds. Which one is correct? I would suggest both of them. Some people say you cannot reconcile Luke's account of the infancy and Matthew's account. And I say, few things are impossible. Yes, it is difficult, but not impossible. So let's explore this further. Where did they come from? From the east. Luke, or Matthew here, could you be more specific? East of what? East Jerusalem? How far east were they? No one knows. The expression there in the Greek is apo Anatolon. You say, what does that mean? Well, it literally means from the rising. They came from the rising. The rising of what? Well, probably the rising of the sun. Therefore, the sun rises where? In the east. Okay, they came from the east. But it literally says they came from the rising. Could it have been the rising of the star? So they came from... Okay, let's go with east. I'm going to say odds are the best translation here is probably east. How far east? We don't know. But that doesn't stop people from guessing. If you read commentaries and encyclopedias, you'll find that the Magi came from, at least according to whoever wrote those articles, Persian. They were Medo-Persian priests. Or they were Babylonians. Remember, Daniel was if you read the book of Daniel in Greek, Daniel was a magus. He led the Magi. That's where you get the idea they were wise men. Does Matthew say they were wise men? No. Does Matthew say they were kings? No. Where did they come from? Persia? Babylon? From Iraq and Iran? Some have suggested from Saudi Arabia, from Jordan, or maybe even some have suggested China. So where did they come from? I got the answer. East of Jerusalem. From the rising east of Jerusalem somewhere. And the context would indicate a long ways away. I think we could safely read that in. So, from the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Why did they come to Jerusalem? Well, what's the question they ask? Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? All right, let me ask you a question. You're a Magi. You want to find out where the King of the Jews is. You want to go and pay homage to the King of the Jews. You heard he's been born. You want to go see him, pay homage to him. Where do you go to look for the King of the Jews? You know, Judea would be a good start. And where in Judea would you go? How about the capital city? Duh. Jerusalem. If I'm going to go look for the new king, I think I'm going to go to the capital, and the capital is Jerusalem. So let's go to Jerusalem. All of us guys, let's go. Guys, do we assume all the Magi were male? Does Matthew say that? Are there any historical documents anywhere that mention female Magi? Yeah. What about those shepherds? Now, were the shepherds all men? Were shepherds ever female? You ever read the story about Rebecca in the book of Genesis who took care of the sheep? There are several instances in the Old Testament of young girls taking care of sheep. But wait a minute. Luke talks a lot about women. Don't you think Luke would have mentioned if some of the shepherds had been female? I think he likely would have brought that out. So could they have been? Yes. Shocking. Yes. Were they? I don't think so. Here's my answer again, church. I don't know. So were there female shepherds? Were there female magi? I don't know. Probably not. Very few things are impossible. Could have been. All right. So the magi come and they go to the capital city. How did they get there? Oh, well, a star led them. Did it say that? No, it doesn't say that. They just went to the capital city of the Jews to look for the king. That just makes sense. After all, we do call them wise men. So hopefully they had enough smarts to know that. Let's read on. So they came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? Now you notice the tense there? He's already been born. He's already been born, and he's already the King of the Jews, and we're here in the capital city of Judea looking for him. Why did they have to look for him? Didn't the star guide them there? Doesn't say that. At least not yet. Nothing about the star guiding them to Jerusalem. Why are they there? We saw his star, is Astra in Greek. We saw his star when it rose, there's our word, Anatole again. Now this time, not east, but by context, rose. His star when it rose, and we have come to worship him, to pay homage to him. Now this may seem strange to us, but it was very common in the ancient world to associate phenomena in the skies with the birth of a king. If someone saw a meteor, what we might call a falling star, a king has been born. If they saw a comet, a king has been born. If they saw a supernova, a king has been born. It was common to associate the birth of a noble, particularly a king, with some heavenly phenomena. Not unusual at all, and particularly if they are, we might say, astronomers. So we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to do homage to it. Did the star guide them? It doesn't say that. They saw a star, and when they saw the star, they said, oh, that's the star of the King of the Jews. Now, why were, if they were indeed Gentile magi, which I do think that's the correct analysis of this, they were Gentile magi, what are they looking for the King of the Jews for? Well, historical manuscripts have been found that show that many Eastern cultures looked for a great world leader to come from, of all places, Judea. So they seem to be familiar with that. Now, one thing you got to realize too is that there were Jews all over the world. There were probably, according to some records, over 1 million Jews in Babylon. And they were scattered. So Jewish ideas and thoughts scattered, Jewish literature scattered throughout the known world, and there was a common concept that there would be a great world leader who would one day come from Judea. So they're following up on that. Now, what was this star? I don't know. Pastor Dan, how can you stand up there and preach when you don't know so many things? It's easy. In fact, the less you know, the easier it is to talk about it. What was this star? Some have said it was a supernova. Okay. Some said it was a comet. And after all, records indicate that in 12 or 11 BC, Halley's Comet came to be called, passed over that region. Okay? Some have said it was a planetary conjunction because during that period from about 7 to 6 BC, The planets Jupiter, Saturn, and occasionally Mars were somewhat in conjunction, and maybe that's what they saw. It could have been an angel. It could have been some supernatural manifestation. You know, if I had to guess, I would guess that. Let's just make it easy. It's a supernatural manifestation. Duh. Takes away a lot of that. But some people don't believe in supernatural manifestation, so they've got to go with something else. Whatever it was. They called it literally a star, Astra. Now, verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, deeply agitated. Well, hello. Who's the king of the Jews? Herod thought he was. These magi come and say, well, we just heard the king of the Jews was born. Where can we find the king of the Jews? And Herod's like, so what am I? Chopped liver? I'm the king of the Jews. What are you talking about? Now, Herod's smart enough to hide his disturbed frame of mind. But this is an insult. Now, you think, if you know a little bit about King Herod from history, King Herod had multiple wives, and he killed his first wife, murdered her, because he didn't like some of the things she said or did. He killed two of his sons because he thought they might be looking to be king. This is not a nice man. And these magi have just naively said to him, well, where do we find the new king? Oh. But he's not a fool, so he behaves carefully and deceitfully with the magi. So when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. I guess so, if the word got around, they'd go, they did what? They told King Herod they were looking for the new king who was going to replace him. Are they still alive? What is he going to do? And he might just kill all of us. So yeah, the city was upset when they heard about this. Verse 4, when he, Herod, had called together all the peoples, notice not Herod's, but all the people's chief priests, current and former, and teachers of the law, that is, scribes or lawyers who were mostly Pharisees. So you've got Sadducees and Pharisees. This could have been the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling body composed of Sadducees and Pharisees during this time. So he called them together. Now, why did he get the Sadducees there and the Pharisees? They didn't agree. The Sadducees had no interest in a coming Messiah. The Pharisees believed the Messiah would come, but not for a while. They had their own ideas about it. But he wants to know, what do the Sadducees and what's the wisdom in that? Well, now he's going to get both points of view. And if the Sadducees and Pharisees agree on what he's about to ask them, that gives Herod a pretty good idea it must be right. If I can get these two differing parties to agree, then I've got good evidence that what they say is correct. So he called them together and he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. Now, what do we make of that statement? He asked them where the Messiah. Herod professed Judaism as his religion, but he doesn't know enough about it to know where the Messiah is supposed. He knows there's a Messiah, but he doesn't know where the Messiah is supposed to be born. So he calls for the experts. Now notice that he equates what? Messiah, Greek word is Christos, Christ. What does Herod immediately assume the king is? Messiah. He equates Messiah and king. So he asks them, where is the Messiah, the king of the Jews? Where is he to be born? Do you know? And they answer, verse 5, in Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. So they knew and understood, both Sadducees and Pharisees, evidently, that the prophet, in this case, we've got Micah, had prophesied long ago that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Why Bethlehem? City of David. He would be of the line of King David, and therefore he would come out of Bethlehem. So he's quoting here from Matthew 5, verses 2 through 3. And the Greek says, this stands written through the prophet. Now, what we're going to see here a lot, just in chapter 2 alone, is how much Matthew uses prophecy fulfillment. Prophecy fulfillment. And what's his point? What's Matthew's point for his readers? Who is Jesus? Don't lose sight of that. What Matthew wants his readers to get, his audience, who is Jesus? So we're seeing here Jesus is who? King of the Jews, Messiah, descendant of David, born in the city of David, Bethlehem. This is what the prophet Micah has written. And Matthew quotes it this way. But you, Bethlehem, and the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. That's somewhat drawn from Micah chapter 5, verses 2 and 3, and somewhat from 2 Samuel chapter 5 and verse 2. Now, the challenging thing is that's not exactly what those verses say. Now, either Matthew played with the material a little bit, or the Pharisees and the Sadducees got it wrong, and Matthew reports what they said, or Matthew, and here's what I think is most likely, Matthew was reading from a Targum or a text that was not the Septuagint, was not what became the Masoretic text, but he had his own text. Now, he contradicts what Micah says. If you read even in our English versions of Micah chapter 5, it says, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Ephratah, so Matthew translates that to Judea, correctly so, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. That's not what Micah says. Micah says, you, though very small, the least among the clans. All right. So Micah, according to the Septuagint, and what came to be the Masoretic text, says, you are the least. And Matthew goes, No, I'm changing that. So either Matthew played with the text, or he was reading from a different translation, or a different Targum, or something. But it all proves the same point. You know, it all goes to the same place. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, the city of David, and he is the Messiah. All right, now he's going to tell a story. And what a lot of people have noticed, that the story he's about to tell about the Magi is very similar to the story of Balaam in Numbers chapters 22 through 24. You remember Balaam? You probably remember Balaam's ass more than Balaam, because remember, he talked. And some people would say, yeah, he was talking out of his ass, which is, don't be offended, because it's true. All right. But the story of Balaam, if you go back and read it, and I won't take the time to do that, but it is similar to this account we're about to read. And some have said, well, did Matthew draw this from Numbers? Maybe, but not necessarily. But maybe he saw some parallels between the story he knew and what had been written about Balaam in Numbers. Anyway, verse 7, then Herod called the Magi secretly, and he found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. All right. When did the star first appear? So what's the implication here? I want to know the year, the month, and the date the star appeared. Why? Because that's the day this baby was born. I want to know the date of the baby's birth. Why? I'm going to go looking for that kid. and I want to know how old he is so that I know who to look for. So give me the exact date of his birth. But now what does that tell you? Do you think the Magi were there and by the manger at the birth of baby Jesus? No, we've already seen, right? Time has passed. They saw the star designating, evidently by context, when Jesus was born. They've traveled from the east when they first saw the star. How many days? Don't know. But time has passed. And now when they get there, they go to Jerusalem and they say he's already been born, but we want to know where he might be. And Herod says, tell me when you saw the star. I want to calculate how old this kid is. So he wanted to know what time the star had appeared. Verse 8, he, Herod, sent them to Bethlehem. You notice anything? Did the star lead them to Bethlehem? How did they go to Bethlehem? Herod sent them to Bethlehem. Did the star bring them to Jerusalem? No. Did the star bring them to Bethlehem? No, not yet. Herod sent them to Bethlehem. He gave them the answer of where the Messiah was to be born, the King of the Jews. So Herod says to them, go and search carefully for the baby. Does it say that? What does it say? Go and search for the child. Paidion in the Greek. A child, not an infant, not a baby. In fact, Matthew never uses the word brephos, baby. For Matthew in the story, there is no baby. There's a child. Luke uses the word brephos, baby, infant. Matthew does not. Why? Because this story centers around a child, not a baby. Time has passed. So go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Yeah, right. Verse 9. After they had heard or listened to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star they had seen when it rose, Anatole, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Now we've got the star doing something. Now the star is leading them where? To the child, over the house. Let's see here. All right, let's look at this closely. So they went on their way. Now the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped or arrived over the place. What place? What? City of Bethlehem? Maybe. Just over the town? Maybe. Over the place where the child, Paidion again, child, not baby, not infant, child was. And we assume that was Bethlehem. Verse 10, when they saw the star, the Astera again, they were overjoyed. So they hadn't seen the star, the implication is, since they left. They saw the star, decided to travel to Jerusalem, the capital, got there, were sent to Bethlehem, saw the star again, and were very encouraged by that. Verse 11, on coming to the house, what? Where's the stable? There is no stable. Where's the barn? There is no barn. Where are Mary and Joseph and the child Jesus? They're in a house. Was this the same house Jesus was born in? Don't know. Could have been, probably not. It looks like time has passed, and now they have moved from guest quarters or from the living room of someone else's home, perhaps into their own home. Anyway, it's a house. They found the child in a house. The Magi were not at the manger in a stable with the shepherds and the angels. No, time has passed. And now the Magi find them in a house. So coming to the house, they saw the child, not a baby in a manger. They saw a child with his mother Mary. Now, very human. Okay, question, where's Joseph? Why does Matthew mention the child? And he's going to say that several times. And he's not going to say, well, you would expect, I found Mary, the mother, and her child. No. Matthew continually says, the child, and his mother Mary. It's the child who's the focus, but the fact that he has a human mother, and Mary is his mother, she's human, and the child is human. Matthew wants his audience to understand that this is the Son of God who became human. So when they saw the child with his mother Mary, they bowed down in worship, paid homage to him. He's the king. Notice, the Magi never call him the Son of God, the Savior. What do the Magi view the child Jesus as? A king. They've come to pay homage to a great world king. Matthew wants his readers to understand that for much of the Gentile world, the educated, scholarly, well-traveled Gentile world, Jesus was recognized as a king. So, then they opened their treasures. The Greek word there is thesaurus. You ever heard of a thesaurus? Now you know what a thesaurus is. It's a treasure chest, a treasure box. You say, I thought there were words in it. Yeah, the words are treasures. But yeah, that's where we get the English word thesaurus. So they opened their thesaurus, their treasure box, their treasure chest, and presented him with gifts. Now, did they have these gifts when they went to Jerusalem? Don't know. Where did they pick up these gifts? Don't know. Did they bring them with them from the east? Don't know. What were the gifts? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Where does gold come from? Well, several places. Where does frankincense and myrrh come from? A few places, but primarily Arabia and Africa. Wait, did they go through Arabia and Africa? Did they come from Arabia and Africa? Or are they traders and they bought this somewhere among the caravans who are trading? Don't know. So they gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And what's commonly come to be thought, and is based in historic fact, is that gold was considered fit for a king. So gold is seen as an offering, a gift to a king. Frankincense is an incense that was often burned to worship, even burned in the temple to worship God. But were among Greco-Romans burned to worship gods, and even Far Eastern tribes burned as incense to the gods. So, divinity, king, frankincense, divinity, myrrh. Myrrh is often used to anoint someone for burial. Interestingly. But frankincense and myrrh both have pharmaceutical properties, and they're very rare and very expensive in the day. Now, some people say, well, give me the gold. What's frankincense? What's myrrh? Get that stuff out of here. Give me the gold. Actually, it's possible that the frankincense and myrrh were more valuable than the gold. Very expensive gifts for this king. Now, what's going to happen after this? Well, it's difficult to harmonize this, but let me throw something out here. When Jesus was 8 days old, where did he go? Anybody remember? He went to the temple in Jerusalem. Why? When he was 8 days old? To be circumcised. Okay. According to the law of Moses, after a woman gave birth to a male child, she was unclean for 40 days. Then she had to go and present an offering for her firstborn male child. Did Joseph and Mary do that? According to Luke, yes, they did. 40 days after the birth, they went to Jerusalem to the temple, and they met a couple of prophets, a male and a female prophet there, who pronounced blessings and prophecies upon Jesus. Now, what sacrifice does Luke say that Joseph and Mary offered for their firstborn son? They offered 2 turtle doves. Why didn't they offer a lamb or a sheep or a goat? Because they couldn't afford one. The turtle dove was the offer of poverty. So according to Luke's version, Mary and Joseph were poor, living in poverty. And 40 days after the birth of Jesus, they were in poverty and offered 2 turtle doves in Jerusalem. Then where did they go after that? Well, it depends on who you believe. Luke implies that after that they went to Nazareth. Matthew implies that after that they went back to Bethlehem. How do you deal with that? Okay, I'm going to tell you how I deal with that. I deal with it. They went back to Bethlehem and then later went on to Nazareth, but Luke leaves that out. You know, they can write the story any way they want to write it. And they have different audiences and different purposes, and they tell the story the way they want to tell it. I often do that with stories, after which my wife says to me, "It didn't happen that way." Yeah, it did. I'm just telling it for the audience, to kind of make a point. Well, I think that they told it for their audience and told it in the way they want to tell it. So I'm thinking that after they were in poverty, made the offering of turtle doves, they went back to Bethlehem. While they were in Bethlehem, the Magi came, and the Magi gave them gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and they are now well-to-do. No longer poor, thank you very much. Now we got some valuables. We don't often think about how that raised the status of Mary and Joseph and their family after these gifts. So, verse 12. After having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, the Magi withdrew and returned to their own country by another route. So I'm going to suggest this was at least 40 days. So look, you got travel time from the time they saw the star, okay? They traveled from somewhere in the east all the way to Jerusalem. The star said, Jesus is born, travel time. In Jerusalem, Herod sends them to Bethlehem. They go to Bethlehem, but they didn't get there for at least 40 days. Why? Because I just told you that Joseph and Mary were poor. So the Magi hadn't visited them yet. So that's 40 more days after Jesus was born. At least significant time has passed between the birth of Jesus and the visit of the Magi. So, verse 13. When they, the Magi, had withdrawn, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Now, have you noticed that Joseph is the star of Matthew's account pretty much? A lot of this is focused around Joseph, where Luke's account is focused where? Around Mary. So the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child, not baby, take the child and his mother, again, the child and his mother, and escape to Egypt. Why to Egypt? Egypt was what we would call a sanctuary country. It was very common for Jews fleeing oppressive Roman rulership to go where the Roman rulership was less oppressive, namely Egypt. So I would just call it a sanctuary country. What part of Egypt did they go to? I don't know. If they went to the border, that's about 75 miles. That's an easy walk. To Gaza, maybe. Did they go? I don't know. But they went to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child, not baby, not infant, to kill him. Now, why didn't Herod have them followed? He could have said, follow those magi. The possible reason is that he wanted to gain their confidence so they would tell him everything they knew. And he knew that if he sent a guard with them, they might become suspicious, whatever reason. He didn't send an escort with them. He let them go. But as a result of that, all Herod knows is the kid's in Bethlehem. Somewhere in Bethlehem. I don't know where, but I'm going to send my soldiers there to look for him. How hard could it be to find him? Bethlehem is what? Maybe 300 or so people? And these 3 or more guys dressed like foreigners just showed up in town. Shouldn't be too hard to find where they went and find this kid. So, Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. Verse 14, so he got up, took the child and his mother, again, that same phrase, the child and his mother, during the night and left or withdrew for Egypt. Verse 15, where he stayed, actually literally existed, where he stayed, how long? Don't know. Matthew doesn't think that's important. How long? He stayed in. Okay, what kind of time frame have we got here? We've got time going by. They haven't gone back, according to Matthew, to Nazareth yet. They're now in Egypt, and after they leave Egypt, they're going to think about going back home to Bethlehem. But their plans are going to change. So he stayed until the death of Herod. When did Herod die? We don't know. Depends on whether you like the coin or you like Diogenes, the humble guy. Different thoughts. Mostly accepted today, 4 BC. That's the most widely accepted date, according to Josephus and others, that Herod died 4 BC. So Herod died in 4 BC. So all of this took place when? Well, if Josephus is right, it all took place before 4 BC. Matthew again, and so was fulfillment, and so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Hosea 11:1. Again, for Matthew, prophecy, fulfillment. What is Matthew telling us? Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. The law, the prophets, and the writings all pointed to what? Jesus, the Messiah. Jesus is the true Israel. Out of Egypt I called my son. Do you get the comparison? Joseph going into Egypt, Israel coming out of Egypt. When Israel out of Egypt went, being the slain of the firstborn, and there's so many parallels there that Matthew says, who can the Messiah be other than Jesus? Do you not see all the parallels? Do you not see all the fulfilled prophecy? Do you not see how this all ties in to Balaam, to the Exodus, to all the stories of it? They're all fulfilled in Jesus, is what Matthew wants us to see. Verse 16, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted, mocked, ridiculed by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave order to kill all the boys. Kill all the who? The babies. Kill all the babies. No. All the infants. No. Kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under. Where'd he get that date? 2 years old. From the time they saw the star. 2 years old and under. He was playing it safe. But he said, this Messiah, this king who's been born, this child, could be as old as 2. So this story the visit of the Magi could have taken place as much as 2 years after the birth of Jesus. So you got a manger scene at home? Take those Magi out of there. No, I'm just kidding. Leave it alone. It's okay. Leave it alone. In accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. Prophecy, fulfillment. And then he quotes about the voice heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they were no more. It's a symbolic prophecy, really, of the captivity of Ramah. The children of Israel, both in the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities, were taken north past Ramah, past Bethel, into captivity. But then years later, they return. So he's got a prophecy here that we're crying because of the death of these children. Now, some people have said, well, how many children was it? We don't find it reported much in secular history. Well, Bethlehem was a small town, a few hundred people perhaps. How many 2-year-old boys and under were there? Maybe a half dozen or so? Don't know. But in other words, it wasn't a big enough news deal to make secular history. But that didn't affect the parents who lost their children. But it was like the prophecy of going into captivity. But the good news is they're going to come out of captivity. The Messiah is going to come out of Egypt. And the Messiah is not dead. He is alive. And he will return. Verse 19. And Herod died, 4 BC. An angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, here we go again, the child and his mother, again, and go to the land of Israel. For those, Herod, his soldiers, who were trying to take the child's life are dead. Verse 21, here we go, out of Egypt. So he got up, took the child and his mother. Do you think Matthew stutters? Or does he have a point he's trying to make? Took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. Even he uses the word Israel. When Israel out of Egypt went. Doesn't call it Judah here. Doesn't call it Jerusalem. Doesn't call it Bethlehem. He calls it Israel so that we get the point. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there because he was bad like his father. He was notorious. So having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. Now, Matthew has them finally, after a couple of years, going, instead of back home to Bethlehem, going to Nazareth in Galilee. So was fulfilled, again, prophecy fulfillment, what was said through the prophets. Which ones? Matthew doesn't tell us. That's the prophets. That he would be called a Nazarene, which was kind of an insult. Remember what Nathanael said when his friend told him, said, well, come see Jesus. He's the Messiah. He's from Nazareth. What? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Had a bad reputation. So to be called a Nazarene was a put down. But why does Matthew mention that? Because Jesus was known as what? The Nazarene. Where was he born? Everyone tended to assume Nazareth. And even people question him in the Gospels, like, he can't be the Messiah. He's from Nazareth. But we know he was really from Bethlehem. But Matthew says, but he became known as a Nazarene. So they did not recognize him for who he was. All right. So what did we learn from Matthew? Matthew appears to be writing to a Jewish Christian community sometime during the second half of the first century that exists in tension with rabbinic Judaism. The church, Jewish Christians in the church and Jewish non-Christians in the synagogue, can you see them in rivalry? And it's sort of like having a Ford dealership on one corner and a Chevy dealership on the other. And they're all looking for customers. And there is a rivalry and a competition. And that seems to be the kind of the kind of house church that Matthew is writing to here, Jewish Christians. Matthew seeks to establish who Jesus is, particularly from a Jewish perspective. Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of David, the King of the Jews, the personification of Israel, the fulfillment of Torah. Matthew repeatedly refers to Jesus as the child and his mother, emphasizing that Jesus was fully human as well as fully the Son of God. But whereas Luke emphasizes Mary, Joseph is emphasized by Matthew. Why? He's the legal descendant of the house of David, out of which the Messiah would come. So, did you notice that Matthew, by using the Magi, says the Sanhedrin, the Sadducees, the high priests, the Pharisees, the doctors of the law, the lawyers, they didn't recognize Jesus. All they knew about, they did not recognize Jesus. They rejected him. And a bunch of Gentiles came all the way from the east to pay homage. Intelligent, intellectual, studied, scholarly, wealthy Gentiles came and paid homage. And for a Jewish Christian church, wondering why there were so few Jewish Christians by the end of the first century, and it mostly had become a Gentile church, that was reassuring to hear from Matthew. Oh, I see. Our people didn't get it, and the Gentiles did, right from the very beginning of the story. So, as we rehearse the visit of the Magi, we should be reminded that we too should come into the presence of the King, that we too should pay homage to the King, and even, it wouldn't hurt to bring some gifts when we come. Jesus is the Son of David, the Messiah, the Christ, the chosen of God, the fulfillment of the Old Testament, the Son of Mary, fully human, but the Son of God, fully divine. So, this Christmas, Advent, New Year season, let us come before the throne of the King. Let us come before him as the Magi did. And let us too bow down before him, pay homage, and worship him, our Savior, our King. As the hymn we sing says, "Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Christ, our King." Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.